Well, welcome everybody back to the Flying Doghouse. I've been talking about doing this for a couple of weeks, so we've decided we'd have a woof at it. So we're going to take a look at VOR navigation. And if you've never done this in a simulator, this video is for you because we are starting from the ground up here. So we're going to lay a little bit of the foundation here, talk about a couple of key concepts, and then we're going to jump over into a Cessna 152, and we're going to have a fly from one regional airfield to the other in North Carolina, and in the middle is a VOR station that we are going to use to help us get familiar with a couple of instruments in the cockpit, namely the Course Deviation Indicator, and learning how to interpret what that instrument is telling you. We'll also look at tuning in the actual VOR. So every VOR has a frequency that it broadcasts, so we'll delve into that. We'll also learn how to verify that you have correctly selected the VOR by listening to its unique Morse code signature. And then we're going to get up in the air, and then we'll use the VOR to navigate between these two airports. So again, this is basic stuff. So if you've never tried this, I encourage you to watch this video and then go have a go at it in the Cessna 152. It's a great place to start. All right, so let's switch gears here. Let's talk a little bit more about how you would plan the flight. So we're gonna do that. We'll look at a navigational chart, and we'll get rolling. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to do was just to kind of take a step back here for just a minute or two, and then kind of walk back through really what we're up to here in terms of using VOR. All right, so the first thing that I would point out is there's a number of different pieces of equipment that are being in use in the real world and also in the virtual flight sim world in order for the system to work, right? So there's a ground station on the ground that's broadcasting the navigational information to the aircraft. Again, VOR is broadcasting in 360 degrees, right? So for every degree on the compass wheel, there is a signal being sent out away from the VOR. Okay, so you've got a ground station. Then you also have to have equipment in the aircraft to be able to receive and then also interpret that information, right? And then display it to the operator of the aircraft, right? So we have the navigation radio, which is responsible for receiving the radio signals. Then also you have audio in the cockpit. If you turn on the audio for the nav radio, then you will hear the Morse code for the VOR. And then you also have the Course Deviation Indicator to then translate the information that it's receiving into some meaningful information to the pilot. Are you to the left of your intended course to the VOR? Are you to the right? Are you dead on track? Are you approaching the VOR? Or are you moving away from it? So all of those fun things are happening on that Course Deviation Indicator instrument. The last piece of kit that you need in order to be able to make this work then is also antennas, right? There's an antenna on the aircraft and then also on the ground doing the broadcast. And then just for full transparency, there are also other types of VOR stations. We're talking about the vanilla VORs today. There are VORTAC VORs and then DVORs. So those are, just different iterations of really the same base technology, other than DVOR being more sophisticated and then also less sensitive to interference. Okay. So what else would we want to talk about here? Inside the cockpit, right, you've got the course deviation indicator, which I just mentioned. So I took a screenshot of the 152. And actually, this is a screenshot of the cockpit on the ground at Burlington. So you're actually seeing what you would experience in the aircraft should you choose to fly this route yourself, right? So notice the vertical line is to the left. It is not lined up in the middle. So we need to move our aircraft to the left in order to achieve our intended path across that VOR. You'll also notice that on that particular instrument in the screenshot, the 2 flag is pointing toward the sky, right? So that means we have not yet gotten to the VOR. Again, that makes sense. We're sitting on the ground in Burlington. And it's displaying all of that information because I have dialed in 113.00 into the navigation radio, right? So it won't show anything. You'll have nice centered up lines here until you go ahead and put in the frequency for the VOR. All right, so each VOR station has its own unique 3-digit identifier, although you could have multiple VORs across the world using the same 3 digits. They just won't be in the same region, right? So I could have a LIB in the UK. All right, so the course deviation indicator, we've talked about that and given you information about to, from, right, left, right, or on course. And then the last piece of kit that you're going to need is your flight planning software to map out your flight and then gather all the information you need about the VOR stations that you're planning on utilizing during your flight. So there's that. In this particular case, okay, so not to take away from some of the stuff that's going to appear later in the video, we are using SkyVector, right, to put together the flight plan, and that's what I use in this particular instance. There are lots of different planning tools that you can use for that. But at any rate, I wanted to give everybody a visual in terms of what the heck are we doing here. We're picking our departure airport, our destination airport, and then the Liberty VOR to navigate between the two, right? So obviously degrees of complexity can go up in terms of how you're using VORs, but this is a simple point-to-point with a VOR in the middle, just to get used to what's going on with the instruments. So again, not going to belabor the point on that. Also, what are you going to be seeing on the CDI? In this particular case, we are so close to the Liberty VOR that as soon as you key in the frequency for the VOR, you're going to see the course deviation indicator change and then start displaying information. You'll also be able to hear the Morse code from the VOR if you turn that audio portion on as well. Again, just trying to give us, a little bit of visualization here. All right, what else? Well, once you get into the cockpit and you're going to then see sort of the default looking course deviation indicator, which is what's included here in the screenshot, right? So the compass wheel, the OBS bearing at the top of the wheel is pointing north. We'll need to dial in the desired radial that you want to use for your flight. For this particular flight, we're going to be using 214. So once we get into the aircraft, we'll dial that in, and again, it's a simple matter of just turning the OBS knob to get that into its desired position. Right, you're not going to see any of that jazz until you've actually dialed in the radio frequency, right? So you have to put in 113.00 in this particular case for the Liberty VOR, in order for us to be able to then start interacting with the ground station that's broadcasting, and then the aircraft is receiving that information from the VOR and then translating that information either into audio via a speaker, or it's pushing information over to the course deviation indicator, right? So, okay. So that's a lot of stuff to cover, and there is going to be some repeat and some redundancy in the video just to hear the words, right, and give you another opportunity to sort of absorb all of this new terminology, maybe very, very new to you. So, again, this is not hard, right? I mean, the basic blocking and tackling, if you will, here is putting in the correct frequency for the VOR, being in range, and then also then taking a look at a chart and then thinking about what pathway, what radial do you want to fly toward the VOR and then away from it to get to the next part of your flight destination. All right, so there we go. We're going to switch over and we're going to spend a little bit more time over in Sky Vector talking about how it works, but this should set us up for then our quick flight over to Asheboro from Burlington. All right, so let's switch over. Okay, so in order for us to have a discussion about using VOR, we need to take a look at some of the tools that you can use to plan your flight, and one of the ones that I do use, although my main software that I use for this is a little nav map, but I like Sky Vector as well, particularly if I want to look at the local charts. So this is a segment of the chart from, this is the North Carolina Piedmont Triad area, right? So I tried to pick a very straightforward route for us to have a conversation about using VOR navigation, and then also getting into the Cessna 152 and looking at its analog instruments. So we're going to look at the course deviation indicator and try to make some sense out of that. And then also, I thought it would be helpful just to actually look at a chart and then think about what a VOR does, and then how it interacts with you as a pilot in the real world or in a sim. And obviously, we are taking the simulator approach. So, legal disclaimer here: this is just this is for entertainment purposes only, and to help you get a good basic understanding of using VOR. So this is sort of VOR 101 for beginners, and I'm not going to delve all the way down into the weeds with this, but I think this is good enough for us to have an intelligent conversation about really what's going on here. So the flight plan that I put together was to fly from Burlington Alamance, which is KBUY, and make our way down to Asheboro Regional, which is KHBI. And to do that, we're going to use the Liberty VOR, and its abbreviation is LIB, and its frequency, radio frequency, is 113.00. So in order for the instruments to be able to interact with the VOR, you have to dial in your navigation radio to be able to receive the signal from the VOR, and it also has to be in range. Now, it just so happens that we are so close to the Liberty VOR that when we jump in the cockpit in the 152 and we change the frequency to 113.00, we're going to immediately see the course deviation indicator switch over and then give us an indication on that instrument with a vertical line what direction we need to move the aircraft in order to be able to make our way to that VOR along one of its pathways. So one of the terms that you're going to hear in terms of VOR discussions, the people are going to talk about radials. Well, the easiest way to think about that is thinking about a VOR being a radio compass wheel, right? So it's broadcasting in 360 directions. So you have 360 different pathways that you can take to make your way to a particular VOR. So one of the things that SkyVector does is when you put in your airport designators and then you add the VOR, it's going to show you on the compass wheel relative to the VOR what you need to put in on the instrument as far as a omni bearing selector setting, so that we dial in the correct direction, if you will, across the VOR. So we're going to head 214 degrees, right? So we'll be moving from north to south, and we'll get to the VOR, and then we're going to turn and then change our bearing to 239 degrees to then take us down to Asheboro Regional, right? So we'll have a little bit of adjustment to the instrument that we'll need to do while we're in flight. So, and that takes place by using the OBS knob on the Course Deviation Indicator instrument, and we'll look at that when we get into the aircraft. At any rate, I have put this flight plan together using SkyVector. We could have done this in little nav map and lots of other places, but we do have the Liberty VOR designated here in SkyVector. And certainly this is not a tutorial on using SkyVector, but I did want you to take a look at what this actually looks like on a chart, right? And then we've got our navigational magenta lines that it's added because I have put in the departure and the destination fields inside of SkyVector, and then also added the Liberty VOR. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, it's think about it being a radio station that's broadcasting in 360 different routes, if you will, or pathways. And again, the correct terminology is called a radial. So whichever of those makes sense to you, kind of think about it in that way, right? So we're going to fly along the 214 degree radial until we get to the VOR. And then the other thing that we're going to see on the instrument, it's going to let us know when we pass across or over and we get to the VOR. There is a visual indicator on the instrument. So there is a to and a from flag that will display. So we'll take a look at that when we jump into the aircraft. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll load over into Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. We could use either, but we'll use 2020 for this. And we're going to use the default Cessna 152 and look at its analog instrumentation along the way. So hopefully you'll find this interesting and informative. And maybe it will help a concept that you might not be familiar with make a little bit more sense. Again, as with everything that we learn in flight simulation, it's a day-to-day learning process, and there's always something new to learn. So at any rate, I hope this is helpful. Let's switch over into the sim and go ahead and get going on our flight. It should be about 24 minutes, right? It's 32.5 nautical miles. So there we go. All right, we'll switch over to the sim. Okay, we're on the ground in Burlington, and we are in the 152, and we are using Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. But in this particular case, it shouldn't matter much at all. So we need to take a look at our navigation radio, right? So we have an active and a standby frequency. And remember from the SkyVector chart that we were looking at, the frequency that we needed to dial in for the Liberty VOR was 113.00, right? Well, I've already keyed that in. I've got hardware that I use to make changes, and I could be, spinning these two knobs in the interface. If you don't have hardware, that's how you would do this. But you'll notice that I am turning the outer knob here, and it's changing the small digits, right, to the right of the decimal place. And then if I use the larger inner knob, it's changing the number to the left of the decimal place. All right, so I'm going to change this to 113.00. And it's not active, right? So it's sitting in a holding spot. It's in standby. And as soon as I click on the swap button, which is located here, it's that double-headed arrow, you're going to see the Course Deviation Indicator, which is this instrument here. Looks like a bullseye, right? Or a gun sight. So it's going to show us relative to where the aircraft currently is, where the VOR is relative to where we are currently sitting. So I'm going to go ahead and make that change. I'll make this active. And notice that the Course Deviation Indicator is now changed. Right? So it knows relative to where the VOR is that we have not yet gotten to that VOR, which makes sense, right? We're sitting on the runway at the beginning of our flight start. But notice that there is this little triangle here, and it's labeled 2. So what this is telling us is that we have not yet reached the VOR. All right, so what does the vertical line tell us? Well, that's telling us relative to where we're sitting on the ground, or if we were in the air flying, that we need to move the aircraft to the left in order for us to line ourselves up with the radial, or the pathway that we talked about earlier. And I have dialed that in at the top using the OBS knob, right? So I turned this knob until I got to 214 degrees, which is what we had, if you remember, from SkyVector, right? And then we'll have to revisit this again, as once we get to the VOR, then we're going to need to change our bearing again, so that we then direct ourselves, to the southwest, right? In order to be able to get to Alamance, as we had designated on in SkyVector. So let's just switch back over here real quick. Right, so 239 degrees for 17 nautical miles will then put us right over the top of Asheboro Municipal, right? So there's our 214 bearing, so I didn't make that up. And notice that this number matches a heading, so if we follow this magenta line straight down, notice that we're going to get to 214, right? So as soon as we get to the VOR, then we are going to turn to 239. We're making a slight turn to the right, and that will take us on to Asheboro. All right, let's switch back to the cockpit. Okay, so there we go. So now hopefully you can interpret what's going on here with this particular instrument. I need to fly to the left in order to put myself in a situation where we're going to be able to get to the VOR, right? The other thing that I would point out too here is that the number at the top of this instrument is not the course that you are flying in the aircraft. That could be 360 degrees, right? You've got lots of choices in terms of what heading you are actually flying. Again, we are picking a pathway across that VOR so that we can get from our current position to our desired destination, right? So that's what's going on with that. Takes a little bit of time getting used to, but I think we're in a good situation here in terms of being ready for takeoff. We have 113.00 active. Now, in this particular aircraft, I think, click on Nav1's receiver. What this is going to do is we should get an audible if the sim is cooperating here. It will get the series of Morse code for this particular VOR. So let's see if this is working tonight. And we may or may not hear anything. And I am not hearing the beep. Okay, at any rate, we are good to go here for takeoff, so I'm going to pause recording and we'll go ahead and get started here in just a second. So I'm going to double check all of my controllers, make sure that we're good to go, and then we'll proceed with the flight. Okay, so after restarting the sim, controllers are now situated, and it also looks like our audio is working now for nav. So we do have the course deviation indicator all tuned into the Liberty VOR, and we have our frequency appropriately set at 113.00. So if I come over to the nav radios, this is what I was trying to do earlier. Click on Nav1 receiver. Should get some Morse code here in a second. So the Morse code that's unique to this VOR would be documented on your chart. And this is just another way to verify that you have tuned into the correct navigational aid. All right, we'll cut the receiver back off. Get ourselves situated here in the cockpit. All right, so the course deviation indicator is letting us know that the VOR radial that we have selected is to our left, so we need to move the aircraft to the left for that. And let's check out the rest of our controls here. We don't need much flap, if at all. I'll leave it at flaps 10 for takeoff. All right. Well, let's go ahead and make our way down to the Liberty VOR. All right, flaps up. And we'll maintain 238 here for a couple of minutes. All right, let's go ahead and make more of a left-hand turn here to intercept our intended radial here. And the 2 flag is pointing skyward, so we know that the VOR is ahead of us, or another way of saying that is we have not reached the VOR. And as we get closer and closer to the VOR, the instrument is going to be more and more sensitive. A little bit of turbulence today, but not a whole lot of wind. All right, so as you notice that as we continue to work our way to the left, the vertical line on the course deviation indicator is continuing to work its way toward the center, which is where we want it. And we'll need to anticipate a bit of a turn back to the right so that we don't overshoot and put ourselves on the intended pathway. And most of the time when you're trying to do an intercept like this, you're wanting about a 45-degree angle to your intended course. All right, we're getting closer. Now touching. And we'll slowly start our turn here to the right. And we are going to overshoot a little bit, but that's okay. I'll give you the opportunity to watch the CDI in action here. Again, I'm not trying to be incredibly precise with this for today's portion of the journey. All right. And just reminding myself the next change that we'll need to make on the course deviation indicator using the Omni bearing selector would be to change that to 239 degrees. So we're going to turn slightly to the southwest, and then we'll make our way over to Alamance or Ashboro. Sorry, Ashboro. So understanding how this particular method of navigation works is a great way of having a backup, right? So if you are using a Garmin and GPS, you know, sometimes those fail. So this is just going to give you another safety mechanism as you need it. The VOR stations are less common in the United States now as they continue to be deprecated. They are there in place to provide us with a good way of having a plan B and also providing navigational support for older aircraft that don't have GPS equipment. All right. Be a little bit more precise than what I am right now. We'll turn here. I do not have live weather on today in Carolinas. It's cloudy and blustery. Would not be a day for being up in a 152. Alright, I think we've got ourselves well situated again. We're about 6.5 miles out. So now as we get closer and closer, I am going to have to continue to make adjustments to stay, close to the track, because it is going to get more sensitive. So smaller deviations are going to show up as larger swings of the needle. And also we'll be watching for the 2 flag to flip. And then you're going to see the vertical line sweep across the face of the instrument. And that will also let us know that we have passed beyond the VOR. And we're moving along here at about 100. We're maintaining our 3,000 foot-ish altitude. The other thing about making adjustments in terms of your course is you're going to have to continue to adjust that. Pardon the voice. For wind conditions too, right? So wind's going to push you right or left potentially. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, we're getting close. And I do have the navigational aids turned on here so that you can observe those. And I think they're helpful as you are learning. Alright, we are closing in rapidly. I am also doing my best here to keep the line in the ballpark almost to the VOR. And it is going to sweep all the way across the instrument. And I would expect the 2 flag to flip to from in just a second. There we go. All right, so now we are beyond the VOR. So we need to use the OBS and change our heading for our course to, I think it was 239. I think that's the radial we had picked. Yeah, 239. All right, so now I need to make a turn back to the right and get ourselves on that new radial. There we go. See it starting to come in here. Decrease our intercept angle here. I'm going to overshoot. All right, we are in rock solid shape here in terms of our nav path. And we're about 12 miles out. Altitude is good. Airspeed is good. Another 5 miles or so, and then we'll slow up a little bit. This particular part of North Carolina is home to the VOR National Forest. And as you can see, there are lots of trees. Alright, we're about 10 miles out. And the airport is dead ahead, 12 o'clock. So we could jump outside the airplane for a minute. Take a peek at the scenery. And Asheboro is home to the North Carolina Zoo. It is a natural habitat zoo for a lot of the animals. A little bit different than what you may have experienced in an urban zoo. Anyway, if you're in this part of North Carolina, the North Carolina Zoo is definitely worth a travel stop. But there we go. I guess there's our travel log out of the way for today. about 6 miles out now. Okay, we can make our turn here and get ourselves into a better situation for a base leg. We'll head for this lake that's off our nose. And we'll see if that's a good turning point for us to get down to a final. Might not be quite far enough. We'll see. We'll start slowing down here. All right. And I believe from memory this is about a 5,600 foot runway here. So plenty of room for the 152. Our vertical descent rate is reasonable. Airspeed is maybe a little fast. We'll just stay outside the plane and make our approach. Take in the scenery. All right, 3.5 miles out. And we'll go to idle over the threshold and then just work our way down to the runway. All right, I hope this video has helped make some sense in terms of what's going on with the Nav 1 radio and how you tune in a VOR and start learning how to interpret the Course Deviation Indicator. And I really hope the explanation about the radials made sense, because that's really the key to understanding what's really going on. I guess the other thing that I would mention, and I don't know if I mentioned it specifically earlier in the video, but when you're looking at a chart, the VORs are always oriented north, right? So north on the 0 degrees is going to be pointing to 0 degrees north. Just pay attention to that. And in true me being me style, we're still at about 75 miles an hour. Oh, that's all right. Well, let's work our way down. Burn this off. And then just let it settle. Okay, there we go. Welcome to Asheboro. All right. Can't encourage you enough to fly the 152. I do truly believe that it makes us all better over the long run. All right, I'm going to leave it here. Please like and subscribe. Let me know what you think of the video. I think the next installment of this is we'll use multiple VORs. Maybe we'll go out west and do that, or maybe swing over into the UK. Do a route that's a little bit more complex. Then we can also think about doing a couple of videos on ILS. All right, so we've just skimmed the surface, and I guess the best way for me to describe this particular video and who it's really made for is for folks who really have not done any VOR flying at all. And obviously there's a ton more information out available on YouTube. Plenty of pilot training videos, but I thought this might be helpful and encouraging for those of you who haven't tried this before. It is not complex. Just takes a little bit of getting used to, understanding a couple of key concepts. All right, with that, we're going to leave it here. I hope everybody is keeping well, and until next time, cheers, y'all.